Good afternoon, everybody. I am Abir Shinawi.
And good evening. I am Doug Handy, and welcome to Real Talk, Our Space.
Yes,
Good
welcome.
to be here.
Yes, it's always interesting because I'm not a big Wednesday person, hump day, but I always look forward to this part of the day. And for some reason, Wednesdays are always busy for me. I don't know why. So, the
Maybe all in
universe
the
is telling me
mind.
something, I guess. So today's episode 14. I can't believe it, but we are continuing with our theme for the month. Brothers, gonna work it out. But we are also super excited. I think both Doug and I can both say I'm fangirling, he's fanboying, I guess, to be joined by someone who we both really hold in extremely high regard.
Absolutely.
So your thoughts, Doug?
So big shout out. We just had our intro. Shout out to Corey Carter, who we shout out at the end of the show. Reason I mentioned Corey at this point, because Corey was the one who hit me to the event. We just call it the Philly Conference.
Mm-hmm.
And that is where I've went 2 years in a row. First year, Corey and I went. Second year, Abir joined in, and Abir and I were able to meet our next guest. And it was just electrifying. I mean, I don't think that's too much to say. Just this the calming presence, the strength, just you'll see for yourself. But I'm very excited that he's here with us this evening and really looking forward to it. So, yeah.
And can I just say, okay, everybody knows I'm from Chicago. Whoop, whoop, I'm always repping my city. I have to say, the brother we're going to have on today is from one of my favorite cities, which is Philly. Now, to me, Philly is the following. Like New York is like, the cool, hip, nobody can mess with us. But Philly is like that person you always want to hang out with, takes everybody under their wing and does their own thing. And you always have a good time. That's Philly for me. Like, I love Philly. So just having somebody here, repping the city, I'm all for it. So I'm excited about that.
City of brotherly love.
City of brotherly and sisterly and everybody love. And, It's got a great vibe. So before we introduce our guest, always remember, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Real Talk Our Space, as you can see right here. And our website is alterconsulting.com at Real Talk, where you can find a lot of our episodes. I may be a little behind recently, but I got some stuff to do. But, I'm not worried. We have some guests. Oh, Philly in the house. Yes, that is true. Yes. We have that. Toya Algarin, and then we have Vicky Redman, and then we have our sister, Bridget Moore. Hi, y'all. Miss Sharif.
Right. Good to see her.
Absolutely. So without further ado.
All right, we're going to get ready for our very special guest. He is Sharif El-Makki. He's the founder and CEO of the Center for Black Educator Development. The center exists to ensure there will be equity in the recruiting, training, hiring, and retention of quality educators that reflect the cultural backgrounds and share common socio-political interests of the students they serve. Now, prior to founding the center, Sharif served as a nationally recognized principal and U.S. Department of Education Principal Ambassador Fellow. Sharif's school mastery charter Shoemaker was recognized by President Obama and Oprah Winfrey and was awarded, the prestigious EPIC Award for 3 consecutive years as being amongst the top 3 schools in the country for accelerating students' achievement levels. Sharif is also the founder of the Fellowship, Black Male Educators for Social Justice, an organization dedicated to recruiting, retaining, and developing Black male teachers. That's who hosted the conference that Abir and I had the pleasure to go see, along with Corey and some other good colleagues. And then lastly, Sharif blogs on Philly's 7th Ward. And he is a member of the 8 Black Hands podcast and serves on several boards and committees focused on educational and racial justice. It is our extreme pleasure to have with us this evening Sharif El-Makki. Welcome, brother. Welcome.
I appreciate it. Shukran. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yes.
Your intro is nice. Like, yeah, y'all got a nice little setup going on over here.
Gotta honor these fantastic.
My hair, right?
Coming out here,
we do what we can for the people, right?
Yeah, that's right. Do it for the people. Do it for the culture. Yeah.
So if anybody's interested also, these are the websites, the Center for Black Educator Development, which is an amazing website because it has everything you need about, and I love how you have on that website, Sharif, for people coming out of high school, people coming out of college, and career changers, which I think is also very important. And hey, and then hi, how are you?
Good.
Good. Hi, Zainab.
Zainabu.
Zainabu, how are you?
Good.
Good. Welcome to our show.
Welcome.
And
I
then,
knew it because I was watching Daddy.
Are you watching upstairs?
Yes, I was watching on Mommy's phone.
awesome.
All right.
Well,
And I
thank you
saw
for
you
joining
on
us. And then you can read a lot of Sharif's amazing writings and insights on the blog, and this is the website. So, Sharif, we always like to start off with asking people, what is your family's migration story? Everybody's got a story.
Yeah. Wow. So my story is pretty deep, and I'll give you the condensed version.
Okay.
I am third generation Muslim. My aunt Mariam introduced her niece, my mother, to Islam. Before that, my mother was in the Black Panther Party where she met my father. And they got married while they were doing that. And before that, they were, they both grew up in West Philly. Didn't know each other until they got older.
Okay.
And for generations we've been in Philadelphia. My mother's side is originally from Georgia. And
Okay.
just like many African Americans during the Great Migration and during that time came up. My father's side, my paternal grandmother was in South Carolina, and the KKK was looking for her uncle, which caused them to end up moving up to New York and then down to Philadelphia, where they had other relatives. So we've been we're a family of educators. My mother's I have 7 siblings altogether. My mother's 5 children, all of them are we're all in education in some kind of capacity. And whether or a nurse, so I have one of my sisters is a nurse. So, folks, we've just been raised to be activists, which is just part of the generation that we were involved in, ended up living in Qom, Iran for several years. My mother lived there for 10 years with my younger siblings. So we've been, we had the opportunity to have be involved in international education and living, and now in mostly in West Philly, though. West Philly, born and raised. Y'all know the rest.
Yep.
That's
don't move to Beverly Hills. Stay on the East Coast.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm gonna stay right here. Right here.
MashaAllah. So you see, I have a lot of things in common with people. Like, you're one of 7, I'm one of 6. You come from big city, I come from big city. Come on, Doug, you got to keep it up.
That's right. I know. I'm just sitting back, observing.
Right. So it's fascinating how people, you have deep Southern roots, and then with the Great Migration story, and then you do speak about Iran, which I heard you talk about it, I think, in an interview. So that would be, when people think of Iran, they think Ayatollah Khomeini, they think of the revolution, they think of course, terrorism.
While I was there.
Oh, okay. So then let's answer this question. What are your reflections about living in Iran? And I did hear parts of it. And I loved how you spoke about the education system there. And what are the misconceptions people have of Iran? What would you tell them? And tell us about your Khomeini story. That would be fascinating.
Yeah. So I would say, one of the things that people just have to be aware, and it's something that, my mother would talk about that she learned in the Black Panthers political education component, is that United States is an imperialist country, and they also always love to have a boogeyman. And so they will find a boogeyman, to rally, not only the troops, meaning citizens, but also the troops to invade whenever they want to. One of my earliest memories, I went to a African freedom school, Nitham Musasa, and we used to sometimes have to look at political cartoons and give our interpretation. And one of the political, and this is like elementary, 4th or 5th grade, we had political science, right? And so one of the political cartoons that has forever etched in my memory was, and it was from an American newspaper, but it was America as an octopus, and it had its tentacles in all these different countries, and that has always stuck with me. And so what I would say about Iran, it was a beautiful experience, beautiful country. My aunt initially moved there. And then about maybe a year later, my mother moved there with her. My aunt lived in Tehran. We moved to Qom. My father, my baba, was in school there, and so were the children. We went to, regular schools. We also went to the Hausa for a little bit, and it was just some of my fondest memories of my entire life. was being there. Got to visit the Persian Gulf, the Caspian Sea, and everything in between. And just as a child, having this international experience, hearing people, you know, the media, particularly as Malcolm said, be wary of what the media tells you. You know, seeing that, hearing that before we went, but then also being there and seeing it, you know, for our own experience was, you know, I think that just really reinforced this idea that, you know, be careful what people say about other people, especially when they're trying to, you know, ostracize them or, you know, oppress them. You know, you look at the 53, you know, CIA involvement of the government overthrow, all this kind of stuff that happens, right? And you know, inserting the Shah in their governmental structure. So I had a great time. I had my first job there working in a bread factory, you know, fresh bread. There's nothing like fresh bread. Like I can't even enjoy the bread in the plastic. Like it's not, you know, it's
well, it's not even toast. It's like, you know, it's not sandwich bread. It's the nice, you know, big
oh my God.
or the fluffy bread. Yeah, I know. I feel you.
Yeah, man, it's something. That was my first job, man, and yeah, just you know, I have a sister that was born there. My brother married an Iranian.
Nice.
You know, so there's a lot of connect. I met my wife. She actually knew my sister over there. I met her through my sisters. They were schoolmates, you know, in Iran. So a lot of just connections and just some fantastic people. You know.
Did you pick up any Farsi?
I did. My Farsi is terrible now, but at that time, people would say like, "You're not from overseas. You were like a Black Iranian. Like you're from down south." Because you know there are a lot of Black Iranians, you know, that people aren't aware of sometimes. And they just would swear that I was from the southern region.
Interesting.
My 8th grade year was in Iranian school, a regular public school in Iran. So my Farsi had to be really tight to pass those classes. So. They didn't have ESOL support in
no, they don't.
in Tabatabai middle school. So
you know. So what's your Khomeini story?
So my aunt who was living there, you know, we got invited to go to his home and visit. So me, my little brother Mikhail, and Mama Shakur ended up being invited, visiting his home and having a little conversation. So, you know, I may have been 11, 11 years old, but it was just interesting, you know. And this is a man who, on Time magazine and newspapers, they would draw him with horns coming out of his head, and you know, all kind of stuff like that. And you know, it's just like, wow, look at this gentle soul, you know. That's, you know, I watched a CIA agent later say like, yeah, well, all he does is he doesn't eat. He fasts all day and he prays all day. And how do we get to him? You know, that kind of thing. So, yeah, it was just interesting to grow up during that time. While we were there was the Iran-Iraq War. Had America done it for him. So, like, it was tough times for the people. Yet they were so accommodating and embracing, and you just saw this unity amongst the people. You know, so
I love it.
Yeah, it was an amazing experience for a 10-year-old to go there and just be there for a few years.
Right. And beautiful experience that one develops out of their own lived experiences that you can actually tell and share with everybody.
Right. And like you said, Sharif, you got to see it for yourself, right? I really appreciate it, right? Because that's Now you talked about a little bit before about the Black Panther Party, about your parents' involvement in that. On your Twitter, you say that you're a proud BPP Cub. So just want to hear a little bit more about that. How has that experience influenced who you are today?
This I think having parents that were who were young, super young, to join the organization, as many of the Panthers were. They were young, they were teenagers, but they had this real love for the community, real love for Black children, and so that has continued to be a part of our upbringing and what was happening because of their experiences. I have to tell you, it wasn't all rosy. My father was incarcerated for his political activities. You may have seen, there's this infamous picture with when Frank Rizzo, one of the more racist police chief, who Philadelphia rewarded with the mayorship after he, abused Black communities. This is how Philadelphia, gave him additional rank. That's what happened. Not like getting elevated in status after you oppress Black people. That's probably one of the quickest ways to get a promotion. And
badge of honor for them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So he was, one of these infamous pictures where him and his Panther Party comrades are lined up in their underwear. I did a Moth series before called Afros, Boxers, and Handcuffs, because that's what I, saw my father in. And, as a young man, seeing that, I was angry, but also was like, yeah, I'm gonna wear boxers when I grow up, because that's what revolutionaries wear. That's what they wear. All of them had the boxers on, nobody had no whitey tighties up in there, so I was like, oh, that's what we're gonna do, so it just had that, but I also had to just amazing experience that, two of my cousins were also in the party. So these were my father's cousins, right? And so it's like this, this ecosystem, right? My Head Start or early, literacy classes was on the porch of my cousin, indoor porch with some of my other cousins and other people from the community, and we were learning how to read, and we learned the alphabet differently. We used there was a deep phonics program, so instead of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, we learned phonetic song of the alphabet. Abacada, efaga, hijaga, lamina pa, quora, sata, ava, was, ya, za. Right. And so it's like the sound of that, so I still remember that from 4 years old. Right. So those are the experiences that, when you talk about like Aunt Mariam, who introduced my mother to Islam and introduced her to Malcolm's teachings, I remember she would tell this story about when they heard it was going to be a raid. Sometimes there would be Black police officers who would call the Panthers and say, yo, they on their way. Right. And so, just understanding like, all the, kind of spook was at by the door kind of thing in the Philly Police Department who know like, oh, these are absolute, this isn't white supremacy. This is white savagery. As my mom said. Aunt Mariam would say, hey, bring the children to my house, that kind of thing. So growing up, it was this, community. But I would say, this continued influences around activism is love for my people, love for the Black community, belief in the Black community, having high expectations for myself as well as our community. And then, my mom joined because she heard that they were feeding Black children consistently. Right. And at first she was like, consistently, I don't know. Let me go check this group out. Everybody talking about they doing something for Black
But that's
folks.
what they were known for, even like in California, all over.
Exactly.
All those programs, right.
She went there, saw that they were serious and she joined, So so that, that's love for Black children, education, all of that, I think is just really deep ways that has influenced our family and continues to do so.
Well, you talk about that's what they're known for. So I'm thinking, again, the misconceptions, right? And I know PBS did a nice piece on, they aired it. There was a movie about the Black Panthers, guardians of the vanguards of the
revolution. Yeah.
Right. And I think that did, open people's eyes up to, how community centered they were, as opposed to just, Black folks with guns, right? Because that seemed to be, like Sharif, you were talking about that boogeyman. That was one of those boogeyman images.
Exactly.
That we've seen, like we were hit with. Like, look at these, Black folks with guns, and like, aren't you scared? And then you find out, what they're really about. And like you said, their love for Black children and the community, once you really start to dig into it a bit. So
yeah, absolutely. And just being able to see like how a Black person holding a gun compared to a white person holding a gun, and what's the reaction? One is like, look at that hero, look at the Second Amendment, protector, all this, kind of madness, but that's part of the, the narrative that they've always promoted about, Black people, just saying like, hey, this was, you're talking about like, Black Lives Matter and hands up and all of this, like, these are brothers who are still in jail, many of them who were in the 60s saying, yo, stop killing us.
Yes.
Stop killing us. Right. And so this is just a continuation. So just, love and prayers for all the political prisoners. Because a lot of times when we're talking about mass incarceration, we forget about the political prisoners who've been incarcerated for decades now, and solitary confinement for 40 years, just like imagine the torture of that, And a lot of it is in response to just the savage oppression that was unleashed in our communities.
Right.
Yeah. And it shows, I mean, the history of, the country when you have people who say commit an uprising, like, for example, Nat Turner, all of a sudden all these laws are passed. And then you have, the Black Panthers, when they wanted to use their guns, all of a sudden California passes their gun laws. It's like this whole negative impact.
Yeah, where was the NRA when that
Right,
was going on?
right? They weren't talking about that, and they weren't
yeah.
worried about any of that. So it's interesting to see, again, going back to Brother Malcolm's quote about the media and how, that perception and when you help your people, what's behind the fact of you want to stop this organization that's trying to make a community better. So I think a lot of that is all within reading between the lines, as they say.
And you mentioned community, like I remember when there were Panthers, and sometimes the police would, they were doing all kind of stuff. I saw that they were making a movie about Fred Hampton, so people would get to see like just how they collaborate to just murder this 21-year-old man. Like like there's such a threat that you're gonna just outright assassinate him in his bed. Which is just absolutely, it's crazy and it's consistent, right? Like that's not new in regard to the Black experience. But they will put these posters, these wanted posters up, and the community would take them down. The community would say like, nah, we're not on our watch. Those are our people, and they're here to protect us and support us, and we're going to support them. And so, man, there's so many stories we could do, like just hours on just how it's touched me. But I would say, in addition to the love, it's just this fearlessness. People now, like, I use old terms. I don't really use, now people are like unapologetically Black. I'm like, well, what were they back then? Like, they like now in 2020, everybody's unapologetic.
Yes.
This, that. I prefer the old terms and the old language around this, and some of it was just like absolute fearless, like we don't blink, that kind of thing.
Right.
So.
Right.
And in the face of some serious forces, like you said, Sharif, I mean, assassination squads, right? Masquerading as long. I mean, stuff on that scale, right? Of course, like you said, it does continue today. But to have that engineer, like, the whole COINTELPRO and just
I was just about to say that. Yeah. Shout out to the professors and the young white folks who raided that FBI office to expose,
co-conspirators, as we would call them.
Yeah, absolutely. They were Snowden before technology, right?
Right, there you go.
They were Eric Snowden. Went out Media, Pennsylvania, right outside of Philadelphia.
Right.
And and took risk, right? Like they weren't just in an armchair, like, right, put a safety pin in my jacket, I support y'all. Or it's not just a BLM flag, outside.
It's not performative at all. It's
right, landed on the line. Right.
They took risk, like that was serious business.
But you gave us another idea, Sharif. We probably have to have you come on and do a whole.
No, you said it. I'm thinking the same thing.
You put it out in the universe.
If I have the honor coming back, I'm gonna bring some of the Cubs, from the community,
yes, please.
Some Cubs out here doing amazing work.
I have to give a shout because I met your mom, Ummi, at the conference, and may Allah give her long life and shifa, inshallah, because I know she's ill right now. But I met her, and she's this little woman, but always had this smile, and I can just imagine what she was like when she was younger. And like, mashallah, now she's still up and going. I could just imagine if I could only be a fly on the wall.
Well, listen, you know what they say. I saw this meme where the father is telling his kids, your grandmom is not the mom that raised me, right? So Philly Muslims will tell you, like, and people back in the day, they would just say, listen, Sandra Lee or Aisha El-Makki, like, well, she was no joke,
I bet. So we want to give a shout out to Mama. So we're going to go to some of the comments. Doug, if you'd like to, here's a very nice one. Sister Elaine.
Sister Elaine.
Finest,
Yeah, finest.
Shout out.
Yes, we are.
Appreciate you, Elaine. Yep.
Toya Elgarin says hello. Thanks, partner. Great.
Good
Thanks for
looking up.
providing perspective. And that's what this whole show is about also, is we want people to understand different perspectives. And even amongst, I think, the Muslim community or within our own communities, there's a lot of things that we don't understand. And then we have Muna, who is actually a high school friend of mine. We went to school together years ago and
Oh,
loves the
mashallah.
conversation. Yeah, so thanks for tuning in, everybody. So you speak about, being very politically active from a young age. You come from a family that's political. And I saw this on your Instagram, which I loved. And I told Doug we have to have this on. And I agree with the sentiment. The quote says, systems need teachers who regard teaching as a political activity and embrace social change as a mandatory part of the job. So for me, I always think people who say they shouldn't be political or keep it out of their classrooms, for me, is from an area of privilege, because you don't have to discuss issues that affect you or your community or your family. So tell us, in regards to the quote, what's your response when people say teachers should keep politics out of the classrooms and have to do that?
Yeah, I mean, this is really telling, particularly, and I'm going to tell it from two different perspectives, which I think, they complement each other. So one Islamic perspective, Imam Hussein, this is Muharram, right?
Mhm.
You have the grandson of the Prophet being slaughtered. And, one of the things he said was that, if you're silent, then that means you are automatically on the oppressor's team.
Correct.
Like that's what your silence mean. And you see this as well. And then you have to also look at when we're talking about politics and education, we're not talking about Democrats, Republicans, donkeys and elephants and things like that. We're talking about the politics that will murder Black children, the politics that will underfund Black children, the politics where we have to say Black lives matter and Black minds matter. And we're talking about those politics where, in Pennsylvania, the funding system is so overtly corrupt that even if you're poor, if you're white, you're still going to get more money for your school system, your district, than if you're poor and you're Black. The darker your district, the less funding you get. And when that's control for poverty. When we see, the city where, less than 60% of Black boys graduate in 4 years. When you see that the best schools, meaning the most selective schools in this city have more white people, on average, percentage wise than the district as a whole. Like the best schools don't look like the city,
Right.
and this happens over all of that. Those are politics. Those are decisions that people have made about funding, about access, about opportunity, about accountability. Those are people's politics. And so when folks are silent about it, even when they say like, oh no, I'm okay, I showed up here, your how you teach our children, how you fund our children, it belies, it exposes what your politics are. And anti-Blackness is a politic. It's a political bloc. It always has been. These United States, the one thing they're united in is racism and anti-Blackness. That's one thing that brings all these states together, historically and currently.
Yep. Yeah. And Sharif, I really appreciate that. I know I tell you last week, and Bear, I don't know if I even shared this with you. I was in a space, at work, some white Black folks, and the whole concept of this, what you're talking about now, like the socio-political, which I think is something you had on the center's website, looking to hire, folks to share the socio-political views of the children they serve in the communities, and really just pushing back against. Frankly, there was a board member who was talking about, Black Lives Matter as a political movement and kind of disparaging that, like we should be careful to follow political movements. But think about what you just said, reflecting on that, that's the counter narrative we don't get, we don't hear enough, like diffusing our right to stand up, make sure we don't have, this violence done to our kids, and we don't underserve our kids, spirit murder our kids, and then all of a sudden, that's political. You can't get involved with politics. So, like Abir always says, like, no, it is politics. And I love the way you open up. Like you said, we're not Democrat, Republican. We're not, I can't tell you which one I am. But like you said, really getting into the heart of the matter. So I appreciate you. You gave me some words that I really needed last week. So I appreciate that. And thank you for expanding on that today.
No, thanks for sharing that experience. I think it's consistent with what a lot of educators, have, across the country, particularly when they're serving Black and brown children. And there are white teachers who understand, like, hey, if I'm going to be about this work, I can't just be silent. I can't just pop in. I'm not just here just for a job. I understand that this education is deeply tied to liberation.
Yes.
And I understand that, anti-Blackness has caused people, as Dr. Howard Fuller say, to be liberated, but not yet free.
Correct.
And so if we're going to go deeply into education, then that means we have to hold ourselves accountable for how we're doing it, as well as those around us. And yeah, we have to chin check folks who are like talking all of this, madness about, oh, well, that's political, that political, and then you see their policies.
Right.
And man, like you can't get more oppressive than that. But they're talking about that organization. It reminds me, back when folks would get fired if they were part of the NAACP, and things like that. Like they were, if you hear that language now, if you're an activist,
right.
Don't teach anti-racist in governmental offices. Like you hear this, like, so this narrative, it almost reminds me like this underwater, creek or brook, right? Where you can't really see it, but it's still damaging the foundation of your house, right? You're like, where's this water? The underground water has continued, even no matter what kind of dirt people throw over it, like, oh no, that's covered, we're good, we're post-racial. That undercurrent has always, and just like in the ocean, the undercurrent is what takes you out. The waves look pretty, it's like right underneath that. It's the same thing with these jokers in these positions.
Right. I wish people would understand that the richness that comes from the Black communities, and also the fact of the cultivating genius, as Dr. Goldie Muhammad talks about, how regardless of what Black people have been facing in this country, they've always cultivated excellence. And people think that when you talk about Black Lives Matter, you're being exclusive, when it's not. It really enriches everybody's life experience. It's something that benefits everybody. Of course, we have to talk about those disparities in the Black communities, but people don't understand the richness of the culture and understand how much this brings to all these students' lives, and then when they spit on it politically, you sit there and think, well, why are you so threatened by it? What is it that makes you sit there and think, oh no, this isn't good for you, when in reality, this is actually better than what you're offering. You just don't want other people to surpass what you're doing as well. So that's the take. I mean, I look at it, but you have,
we definitely
there you go.
Yes,
encouraging and invigorating. And I've heard you say the chin check before. I remember that. And I was like, that's a really good one. Yeah, check, the chin check.
Yeah, I the elementary school we went to in Thammasasa, we didn't take gym classes for our health and physical education. We took martial arts. We took African martial arts called Vidasana and Baba Changa. That was one of the things that he used to always, say, like, hey, listen, you're going to speak the truth. You better be able to defend the truth. Sometimes you got to check some chins out of these.
Love it. Yeah, the chin check. That's a great one. So thank you.
So, Sharif, you talked about some, the traditions of the schooling. And this was one thing I love about your work is just, it's like centering Blackness, how you do. And, I came in education through like African Rites of Passage programs. So one concept I really love that you're into in the center is, the freedom schools. So can you tell us about, the freedom schools, and tell us about how they fuel a pipeline of Black educators, which I know is certainly one of the goals, right?
Yeah, RED with a little bit of HOT. Listen, I love freedom schools. It reminds me, I had such a amazing experience, elementary school experience, growing up, middle school too, but elementary particularly. And, when I think about the Black educators, the Mama Fasahas, the Mama Renees, the Baba Changas, the Mama Kamaras, like they, I'll never forget them. I can't remember most of my high school teachers, but I know my elementary school teachers. They were part of the community. They were they were pro-Black, pro-community. I mean, and they're just amazing, and they're like these Hall of Fame educators. And so for us to, and I had used freedom schools at prior schools, and we tried it out, but it was really this idea, like, this is already intergenerational. And whether you see like Charlie Cobb in his letter to SNCC to launch freedom schools, and in addition to the freedom summer activities that they were doing, and when that took hold with Mama Marion Wright Edelman with the resurgence of it in the 90s, to say this is something that needs to happen. Philadelphia Freedom Schools with their version, which added a high school component so that it was college, high school, elementary, K-12, and then having coaches, from the community who were educators. And so what we did was really just stand on their shoulders and say, like, hey, we're interested, in diversification. Here's this fantastic program, that I experienced as a full-time year-round African free school. Here's a version that people are doing it. How about we combine it where it's a teacher apprenticeship as well as a literacy support program and positive racial identity nurturing in the school. My daughters, have done it in the past couple of years, and they love it. They sing the songs, the chants and cheers, and they progress with their literacy. So, I think Freedom Schools is an integral part because you get real practice, you get clinical experience as Black and brown educators working with real children, and so this virtual experience was something new for us because we were, accustomed to being in person. I was nervous about being virtual, to be honest with you, but it really opened it up. I mean, we had students from Illinois and even one from California. I was just like, it's a 3-hour difference. They're like, that's all right. We want to be a part of this.
Very nice.
And so it was, I'm grateful that this is an integral part of our programming.
Excellent.
It's wonderful. So I believe it was, and I'm going to do a plug for the podcast you part, which is called The 8 Black Hands. And, you can find that on all of any of the streaming, platforms. But you spoke about when you were a principal of a school, and you spoke about how you actually, when students came in for orientation with their parents, you actually asked them what they wanted from the school and how the school can help them succeed into learning what they would like to accomplish or achieve in life, which I thought was powerful because you said that was something that the community loved, and you had a lot of 90% community involvement. So as a principal of Mastery Charter Shoemaker, how were you able to accelerate students' achievement levels? Besides just giving that example, how else were you able to do that?
Yeah. Shout out to my 8 Black Hands crew. They've been so supportive and just, they're just dope. Yeah, please check us out Sunday nights, 9 p.m. Eastern. I think we're closing in on 80 episodes.
Yeah, soon, very impressive. That's awesome.
Very nice.
And you guys are all from various parts of the country, right?
Yep. Oakland. Cole goes in between Oakland and Chicago. Chris is in outside of Minneapolis, and Ray is up in New York, in Long Island. Okay. I say New York is like Long Island. I'm like, it's still part of New York.
Long Island, as they call it. Strong, And in political views, you guys also have very varying political views.
Yeah. We got a Democrat, a Republican, a Libertarian, and me as an independent. So we're
dialogue. Yeah.
Sorry, I know we digress, but again, please, if you'd like to check out some great conversations Sunday night, log in. They're on Facebook as well, and if you want to listen to them, you can have them on other streams as well.
Apple Podcasts, that's where I usually check
Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all of it. You won't regret it. We promise.
I appreciate that.
Going back to the matter at hand.
Yeah, yes. I mean, I think this started, as first of all, I was in schools as a teacher and principal for 26 years. They've all been neighborhood schools. And I've only been in 3. So you figure 26 years, I've always wanted to be deeply involved and rooted in the community. So that, in those 3 schools, and the last one was 11 years at Shoemaker, which is a neighborhood school not too far from where I lived, where my mom still lives. It used to feed into the high school I graduated. Like that's the relationship in the community. And I think I came in, the profession with just a deep respect for families and for communities. You're talking about again, that Black Panther legacy or my parents' legacy and the community that I grew up in and was involved in. I think that just was, just deeply ingrained in me. And so I think, this example of, asking families, like, what are your aspirations for your children? And we want to be accountable for helping you as partners get there. I think that's just a consistent theme of what we tried to do as a school community. Yeah, Mama Toya is somebody from the community who would come in and do an after school program with our children and take them on trips. And we wanted to. Our 8th graders took social justice for their history class. Part of their assignment, they had to do. They had to choose something that they wanted to be active around, something that they wanted to change, but they couldn't do it without one. They had to work with their groups across the across the 8th grade. But then they had to interview. I want to say like 15 or 20 community members.
Wow.
Right.
Okay.
So it wasn't just, oh, you want to do something, you got a good idea, so you're going to implement it on the community. No, you had to go and make sure that it was informed by people in the community. So whatever it is that they chose, their groups chose, they had to do, had to interview. So they were like 4 or 5 coming together in a group. Each of them have interviewed 20 community members. And then they're saying, okay, this is how this all jive. This is how this is informing the community, right? Like across the 3 schools that I always hear people like, oh, I can't, there's no parental involvement, engagement, and we don't see parents at this meeting or that meeting. I just feel grateful and blessed, alhamdulillah. I've never experienced that across 3 schools. At Turner, there was always great community experience. The community used Turner Middle School on the weekends after school. I would take some of the classes, the community classes on the weekend. My oldest son would come with me and he would take classes, at Turner. At Shaw Middle School, the same thing. It was a community school. It belonged to the community. We were there, to support and partner. But I think, just the mindset and the framing of what education is, what leadership and servant leadership in particular, what that means and how that comes alive. I think it's just it's a no-brainer,
How did you there's a lot of politics involved in teaching and education and a lot of bureaucracy. How did you overcome some of that where, sometimes there are people who are pulling at the strings of an administrator. You can't do this or you can't do that. Was that something that you had to endure, or did you have more freedom with that school just because of the nature of the school or who you were, or was that something that you just maneuvered around?
Well, I think it's a combination. Some barriers are things that you see when you take your eyes off the goal. So that's one aspect that I learned as a youth. Another component of that is if your community backs you, and it ain't too much, your supervisor, administrator, if they don't get the vision, it ain't too much that they can do. Right. I remember when we started the principalship, it was me, brother Chris Johnson, Keith Arrington, Aaron Stark, Sheila Mallory. Like we were these young Black principals, administrators. We were like teachers at the same time, assistant principals, and then principals. And one of the things that we talked about was, hey, we kind of made an informal pact that we would not be afraid to get fired if we're doing the right thing.
Love it.
Like we weren't going to be afraid. And I understand that there's a certain privilege or bravado, or some people have told me in the past, like, well, everybody can't afford to do that. I was like, I couldn't afford to do it, but my community couldn't afford some whack principal, either.
Right.
So, and neither could the other, principals who were in this community. So I think, respecting the community, and as like, I'm here to serve you. What is your vision and what are you trying to do? I remember as like a small example, we had back to school nights. We were a 7 to 12 school, which I loved. But, some of the parents were like, hey, like 2 things. One, I've been coming here, for 5 years now, like that kind of thing for back to school, or, like, how can we do things differently? Then there were some others who said, hey, like, listen, we would have, like 50, 60, 70%, for meetings, and the old, while people say the older teenagers get, the less involved parents get, the highest attendance would be 7th and 12th grade, like across the board, like almost 100, the seniors would have 100% for their meetings. But one of the things that parents gave us feedback was like, hey, having it in the evening sometimes is a challenge for us. And we would feed, we would do, all this kind of stuff. We started doing 3 different back to school nights, so to speak. right? And so just so if you have a morning shift, then you can come in the evening, or if you have a lunch break, you can come. So we had
It's a great idea.
three shifts, right? And like, we didn't do it like forever, but there was a time when like that was part of the, part of the plan, right? And so, but it goes back to listening to families and understanding, and the fact I had neighbors and relatives, cousins and nieces and classmates' children. We had students, I called my grand students, my students that I taught their children.
Very
And
nice.
they just talked about trust, right? Like if a parent sends a child, then they send their 2 or 3 siblings, that just meant so much to me, right? Like if a neighbor says, hey, I told another neighbor about the school and they came, like, and then if it's somebody that I taught personally and you put your child in there, oh my gosh, like, what bigger honor can that be? So, sometimes you just gotta, back to your question, sometimes you gotta, do what you feel is right, apologize later, or don't apologize. Some stuff don't deserve apology. Some stuff just.
Our sister Toya says Sharif El-Makki did Sharif El-Makki.
I know,
right?
I like that. So that's the answer to the question. How'd you do it, Sharif? Right.
I did Sharif El-Makki way, correct. These comments, I mean, they're just beautiful. Oh, so I come, Jamila. Thank you for tuning in. Community outreach as an integral part of learning, etc. And I think, and Doug and I talk about this all the time, how we take out the humanity in education. And the fact that, it's just business as usual. It's more about, discipline and grades and, what they're going to get for on the assessment or what have you. And we don't look at it as a holistic approach, which is how you were talking about it. So that is powerful. And just one more, your daughter says,
gotta put that one up there. Right.
That's beautiful.
This feels like a family reunion up at this job.
I love it.
Got my daughter, got my wife, got my father. You know what I mean?
We love it.
And then and my peeps. I mean, but this is part of it. Like, so if I felt emboldened, the community emboldened me, right? Like if they feel like, no, this is the right thing. Thank you for doing right by my children. Then, like what more, every good idea is not going to come from downtown. Sometimes like central offices are almost like those old Uncle Sam posters, like, we're here to help you. You're like, no, we don't want that help. Like, no, like, please don't, but you can't go wrong, with the community, and I think it's just it was a tremendous honor. I mean, it's the part that I miss the most about being directly in the school every day is, those relationships, the partnership, and just that mutual, love and admiration. You feel like I'm fighting for somebody, for real. That kind of, fierce determination, the purpose. Like, man, what my community need? What? Oh, it's on. That kind of thing.
I love it. I love it.
So, Sharif, how about the origins of the fellowship, Black Male Educators for Social Justice? That's how I came to know of you and your work.
Yeah.
I'm curious about how did that all come about?
Listen, this is such an interesting story, and it has multiple inroads to how like this, coalesced and formed. I would say the basic, timeline is this idea that there were brothers who we started meeting with, right? Like I was in a couple fellowships, and one of the things I wanted to work on, they were like, well, you have to choose something. So I did a fellowship at U.S. Department of Ed, and also did a fellowship with an organization called America Achieves. So America Achieves, I met, Dr. Will Hayes, who convinced to move to Philly, or part of it. It wasn't me alone, but, group, he came to Philly and joined our network. You had Curtis Lewis, you had, brothers in DC. So there were folks thinking about like, how do we support Black men who are in education? It's such a, tiny amount. How do we support them? If teachers feel isolated and siloed regularly, imagine the Black man, where only 2% of the, public school teachers are Black men. And at the same time, I was at U.S. Department of Ed, when Arnie Duncan and Dr. John King were there. And in that fellowship, you also had to do something, right? And so one of the things I wanted to focus on was, the same thing that Will Hayes and Curtis Lewis and others were talking about. And so we said, I was like, hey, next time somebody reaches out, I'm going to meet with them, and then sure enough, and whatever you say is your purpose or what you're going to do, whatever promise, you're going to be tested, right? And so I was literally tested that next couple of weeks, like, hey, can we talk? Can we, and then I started just meeting these brothers in the city who were thinking about quitting. Some were thinking about, someone just wanted support and to be heard. Others were like, hey, I'm thinking about leaving this profession, like this is not, I feel isolated. I feel ignored. I feel disrespected. I feel like I'm being asked to be the big, angry black guy and just discipline kids, all these kind of things, but we also saw was like hope and ideas and love. And so we just started meeting together. And at some point, some of the brothers were like, hey, we should have a convening, or, I knew more people that wanted to be a part of this. And at first I was like, no, we already got enough people. How, what are we going to do? We'd meet at this black owned restaurant, and just have dinner and talk and things like that. And then at the same time, was this sister who was at the U.S. Department of Ed. She did male educators of color. And she brought all these folks to the Department of Ed, and folks like Kalila Harris and David Johns were supporting, the work there. And next thing you know, we're like, okay, like let's try it. Let's bring folks together. And 150 people showed up, and they were engaged in conversation. That's where I actually first met Chris Stewart, who's part of 8 Black Hands. He came out from Minnesota, and it was about supporting Black men. It was about recruiting more Black men. But the best recruitment plan is a strong retention plan, right?
Yep.
So if we can get people to feel supported enough to stay and stop the churn that children experience over and over and over again, which is traumatic and undermines their learning process, then it could be something. And so, ended up being 17 brothers who were, working together to uplift and elevate and center the experience of Black men in schools and systems.
Excellent. And Sharif, I know you've heard tons of feedback. I guess by the time I went to like I said, I've been to 2 of the convenings. I was just overwhelmed. Like you said, to be in a space with that many brothers, Black men, others who weren't necessarily Black men, but they're to honor Black men as educators, just tremendous. So just want to thank you and the other brothers who got that started. Because I just couldn't believe what I was experiencing. It was just something like anything I'd ever been a part of before. And I think I was close to like 1,000. I think one of the conferences I went to. So the way it grew is just amazing.
Yeah, from 150 and 1,000. And the thing about the fellowship, like it goes back to community. So I had these brothers, and initially it was a little bit of selfishness because I was meeting with these folks individually, and I was like, hey, can we all meet together? Because it's hard to get to all these different meetings on top of meetings, and and these were usually in the evening and weekends. So coming together, they agreed. It came together, and then I was able to call on some of my friends and peers and say, hey, I got these young men. Would you like to come in and help support, mentor, and coach them? And and they did. And so again, that's that lift as you climb mentality. That this is how we're going to support each other, and your win is my win. And when you're struggling, that's a collective struggle, and it's a collective responsibility to try to do something about it.
Yeah, and I have to agree with Doug. Like I went to the conference last year, and again, any excuse to go to Philly, of course, for me. But just the energy and the amount of knowledge that was shared, and it was so varied, and what people were discussing and what people were talking about, and it was just a beautiful experience. And I'm looking forward, and just to think about how small, and then it just morphed and mushroomed into this large thing. I mean, mashallah, it's phenomenal. I mean, you will never be disappointed, people. So hopefully you do it again. So, so speaking of Chris, who is one of your the brothers from the podcast. So the question is, whose idea was it to start the 8 Black Hands podcast? But before you answer that, I have to say this. One reason people should listen to the podcast is to hear the intro. Can I just read the intro briefly?
Sure.
I think it's wonderful. So they say, deep in the heart. Now, there's an amazing voice that says it, not mine, but deep in the heart of public school education, wars rage on, and few warriors come to fight for the people. Yet there is one small band of freedom fighters, bring sanity to the village. Anyone who threatens the education of our 8 million Black children is likely to catch these 8 Black hands. I love it. I love it. And if people are like 8, well, do the math. There's 4 brothers. This is Chris, the brother with the glasses that you were speaking of. But So yeah, how did I mean, I love that intro because whenever I hear it, I'm like, yeah, that's amazing.
You fired up. Yeah.
Yeah, it does get you fired up. So
fired up.
idea?
We fired up. You know,
There you go.
that used to be one of our protest chants back in the day when I was a kid. Woo, we
Right.
fired up.
So how did that come about for the podcast?
You know what? I don't know who actually said, since I don't know, maybe it was me. No, but it wasn't. It wasn't me. But what I would say is that it was also, just feedback. So sometimes we would just get together and we talk. Sometimes it was all four of us. Sometimes it would just be a couple of us, and we'd see each other in these different spaces or online, and people sometimes, I remember, folks saying like, oh, that should be, people should hear what you're talking about. I remember one particular time we were sitting in the lounge at a hotel at a conference, and this kind of semicircle formed, where people just started hanging out and listening. And then we just started having these weekly conversations. We were just like on the phone, just talking, or maybe it was on Zoom or something. And we just started having these conversations, and we're like, this could, maybe we should record this. And so I don't remember, Ray would probably say it was him. I don't know. I don't remember.
I don't know. I'm afraid he's here to defend himself.
Yeah. But we were all, blogging and active on social media and sharing our stories and experiences as Black men. We're all, connected to schools, in schools, whether formal educator, teacher, and principal, like Ray and I, or school board and member like Chris. And Cole got his experience working at the district as well as a social worker, and so we have these collective experiences, and it's just like, what, we have things to say, and there are a lot of people talking who aren't in proximity. Three of us are parents,
right.
And we've been in schools, and there's a whole lot of folks. I get every once in a while I get pinged by professors who ain't stepped foot in the community, let alone can point you to any neighborhood school that's serving Black and brown children, right? But their voices are centered. Yep. And so we just said, like part of the resistance is making sure that we're conversing. Dr. King once said, like, if you want to, fight for justice, pick up a pen, So we were already picking up the pen. We said, let's pick up the microphone too, let's do both. So.
Got to go with the times, basically. So
Very
part
nice.
of resistance is converse. I love that.
Absolutely. So I guess we can count ourselves into that, right? Real talk.
Absolutely. Real talk, right? Like, listen, if you think about all the misinformation, all the messages about, that Black and brown children aren't worthy of quality education, or even if they give lip service to it, you see their policies speak the exact opposite. So it's important that we have conversations, that we have public conversations about what educational justice looks like, what is a just educational ecosystem experience look and sound like. I think it's important, and we, in particular, voices of color.
Yes.
When you look at Pennsylvania, where 96% of the public school teachers are white, a lot of times people are thinking that I'm only talking about who's leading the classrooms. I'm talking about when they retire or when they quit, where they go. Some of them are going in to influence educational policy. Some are writing curriculum. Some are leading schools, right? And so it's an outsized influence. And so we have to absolutely, this is why this is part of the resistance, because if the children are 60 to 80 to 100% Black and brown, but the leadership and all of that, this Black and brown child can see a white teacher and a white principal and a white school board member, and so on and so forth. Like, that's sending messages. That's sending, messages that kids get, bombarded with, as I mentioned before. It's not just the media, and it's not just good for Black and brown children, it's good for white children. Because as much as we talk about institutional racism, a whole lot of racism is taught in car rides home and at dining room tables. So, let's give cognitive dissonance. Let's give them a real education, a liberating education, as we like to say at the center.
Excellent. And Sharif, I guess if we can keep along those lines, you talking about giving them a positive education, a liberating education. The school year has just started, K-12 around the country for the most part this week, maybe last week. What would be your message to educators this school year? They're going to listen to what Sharif El-Makki has to say. So what do you tell them?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I would say is, center the children's experiences, right? Like I hear a lot of people lamenting about their experiences as adults. I want us to center what is the child's experience, so where they are unable to, they are in the stages of their life where they need, where they're the most social, where they need, more contact, not less. But we are forced in this pandemic to do things differently. And so one, center and find way, I hate to say be innovative, because a lot of times districts are already saying like, hey, we might cut your funds, we're like, oh, but innovate at the same time,
Right.
but I do think if you can, be as creative as possible, be as flexible as possible, and just try to be just, try to be just. I mean, I read someone posted the other day of a child saying like, hey, our internet was cut off. And they told their teachers. One teacher said, "Oh, don't worry about it. We'll catch you up." Da, da, da. Another teacher said, "Well, if you're not there, you don't get credit."
Yep.
Right? Like, what kind of response is that? To a child who's reaching out and saying, like, "Hey, we're struggling." And so there are tons of different struggles. And if you didn't have a relationship with children face to face, it's going to be really difficult for you to develop one from afar.
Correct.
And so, but understanding what does it mean to serve, even if it's long distance learning, you're still there to serve. And so make sure that is that's the anchor, that I am here to serve. And I understand that all of this is tied to the liberation of these children, and that there are forces that were designed long ago to undermine the educational success of Black children. So know that, have those politics going in, right? So that's what I would say. Like, fix your mindset. Have your mindset right. Do it consistently. I had did a talk with National State Teachers of the Year, and one of them spoke about that she's a white woman, and she interrogates her own white privilege weekly, on a weekly basis. So she said even when she gives some away and gives opportunities, gives up seats, gives up, donates, whatever it is, she says just by being white in America, she just picks up some more. She's just like, just walking, I get more privilege, and she keeps interrogating that over and over and over again. But that kind of reflection is what we need now, and be patient. Be patient with everybody,
I love how you said
patient with urgency, right? Like patient doesn't mean I'm just sitting in a boat in the middle of the water, right? Patient means that I'm rowing, but I'm like, hey, I don't expect to get there tomorrow, but I am going to get there, right? And so having that kind of prayerful patient, right? Like you're not just waiting for the wind, you're doing something, you're being active. And so that's what I mean by patient. It's a revolutionary patient, not a passive, corny joint.
There it is, Philly.
Yeah.
Love it. I'm getting my notes here. Beer knows what I'm doing, Sharif. I'm getting my notebooks.
Yeah,
I got my message. I appreciate you. Thank you for the message.
Thank you, Keith. It's about time you show up wondering where you were at.
That's always his spot. He comes in at the 1 hour mark.
This is what he come in.
That's right.
When my friends would come up for dinner real late, I'm like, "You just in time to clean up, bro."
Well, Keith has a nickname from us, Dr. Philosophy, so there's a reason for that, because he's just dropping gems. And Bridget sent great advice. Thank you. I want to go back to what you were talking about for new teachers, and not just having students see teachers and educators and administrators. I think a lot of people also miss the point of the behind the scenes of having Black teachers or brown teachers or educators writing curriculum that reflects their students as well. I think people always think of just the optics, but we also need the entire approach as in the schoolhouse and outside, because again, that all goes with the policy. We need people writing curriculum. We need people writing these assessments that reflect our students as well, because you may have those teachers, but if they have to teach a curriculum that's still damaging to kids, then you still have to fight that battle. So I just wanted that was a great point of having the teachers, but I think it's also very important to have our Black teachers and our brown teachers writing the curriculum and these assessments, because they can bring in that perspective as well. Then that can be taught in the classrooms. So
absolutely. And instructional coaches, like I'm so grateful that my instructional coach when I started teaching was Miss Yvonne Savior. Black woman. She was Pennsylvania Teacher of the Year in like 93 or 94. And that was my instructional coach. Like, so I'm learning from, like the best that there is. Right. And I just think about like how many teachers don't have that privilege, that honor, and she would just say like, this is my pleasure, duty, and honor to, to do this. And I just, I learned how to teach from her and a bunch of other, Black men and women, and some white ones. But the vast majority of the folks who were teaching me were Black women. And they were, I mean, their gift was amazing, right? And then you see that, then you see there's so many, there's a lack of Black instructional coaches. And you have all these Black women who are just like absolutely amazing. They've like mastered the art and the science, of teaching. And it's like magical to see students just learning and building community. And then folks are like, well, you can't lead a school, or you can't coach, or you can't do this. I mean, that's where like this racism is, embedded in our educational ecosystem in so many different ways, right? So,
So before we go to our couple of final questions, the question, Sharif, what's the mirror analogy?
Oh, the mirror analogy, Toya's talking about. So it's basically this idea that we're talking about a little bit, like windows and mirrors.
Okay.
So Black children, often they can be sitting right next to a white child in a classroom, and the Black child often gets the windows. The person leading the classroom does not share their experiences. The principal, the school board, but also the literature, what's on the walls. All of this, they see whiteness constantly being shown. An example of this, the 8 Black Hands was we were in Louisiana, and we were at a science museum. And you see this class coming in. These are elementary school, cute kids, like they look like they're in first, second grade, coming to this science museum where we were doing a panel. And, I had looked around. We had all looked around this science museum. There was not a single person of color in any of the exhibits. And so here you have, white children, Black children, brown children coming in, whose identity is being reinforced, right? Who even consciously and unconsciously, who's thinking like, well, we're the only ones that contributed to society. We're the only ones that were scientists and mathematicians. The rest of y'all are just here, those are the seeds of white supremacy if nobody's, pushing back against that. So that happened in a museum. That happens in classrooms every day. And conversely, the white student constantly gets this mirror where their identity is reinforced. And they're told like, yeah, no, you are the only one. And people who look like you and who are from Europe or white Americans contributed to society. And that's absolutely ridiculous. It's violent. It's violent, intellectual violence, when you teach like that. And if you're not conscious about that, you'll just use whatever books are handed you and not look at, wait a minute, who wrote this? Who's it for? Who's the audience? How many of these do I have? And it's not just, if I look at education as a full-time job, I never had a switch where like, oh, now it's 3:00. Now I'm not an educator. Like I never had that, right? Like it was, just pervasive throughout my life. And I was talking to some teacher where they were like, oh no, we have diverse classroom books. I was like, yeah, raise your, and so I asked them that and everybody raised their hand. Most of the people raised their hand. And I asked them, how many of your personal libraries and your children, your biological children libraries are diverse? 99% of the hands went down. Because they're thinking, they're like, yeah, I actually only teach my kid or I only hand them, and they don't give the diverse, you're going to see a white doll and Black kids, white Barbies and Black kids houses. You're going to see much less. They were like, no, they, you know what I mean? Like, no, the default is whiteness. Right. And so students being raised that way, and taught that way, educated that way, I should say, miseducated, that's problematic.
And we're not talking about where those people gained that knowledge or who they stole it from or how they developed it, without any form of, stealing that intellectual property as well. So, that's another show.
That's another show. But yeah, absolutely, man. Don't just talk about the Greeks. Talk about how they, would raid Egyptian libraries. Talk about, carry what they can and burn the rest. Like, let's talk about all this stuff. Let's talk about, Mansa Musa's uncle actually, Abu Bakr traveled to the Americas, right? Like they came before Columbus. Let's talk about that. So those are all parts of, when we talk about the miseducation of the Negro, we're talking about miseducation of the masses.
Yes. Right. Agreed. And it's profound that you talk about instructional coaches, because now we're very proud that Keith is also instructional coach for our county, and we're very happy. I think he's the only Black male instructional coach in the county, which is huge.
Right.
And we know he's going to be doing a lot of great things. And then
Yeah,
Joya says you should have seen the books in Sharif School. I could only imagine.
Right.
Could only imagine. So we're down to some of our favorite questions.
Oh, yeah.
This one's fine, and last one's Doug. So we want to know, which singer or artist would you have perform an album about your life and why?
All right. So I would say I have two. Maybe
Go for
three.
it.
All right.
Okay.
So one would be a combination of KRS-One and Chuck D.
Oh,
Yeah. They're like two of my favorite,
Good.
artists. And if they, I've never been to a KRS-One concert, but he did come to the university. I went to Indiana University of Pennsylvania, and he did come to give a lecture.
okay.
Oh my gosh. The lecture was as dope as his records were. The lecture, I mean, you could just imagine, right? Like it was without beats, without, rhyming, but like, I mean, this brother, so that would be one compilation. Another record would be Patti LaBelle.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, Brian Armstead, her husband was one of my mother's professors at Temple when she was in school. And at one point my mother couldn't watch me, or she was like missing class or something, and she had me. She was like, and he said, "Oh, my wife can watch her. My wife, she'll babysit him." And turns out his wife is Patti LaBelle. So she would babysit me sometimes while my mom was taking classes.
I mean, how many people can say that?
Just me, maybe her son Jory, and I'm sure she's just a giving heart. I'm sure she did that for a lot of folks.
That's amazing.
But, that was always just a fond memories and stuff as a kid. So yeah.
Well, there's this thing on Facebook of
Toya, she's going to win. I love
Gladys.
Either Patti or Gladys Knight. I have my money on Patti LaBelle. I'm sorry. Down.
Yeah, I mean, I got mad love for Gladys, but Patti.
Absolutely. There's nothing, that is ever better than that. So, and that's a great story. So those are the two. You said three.
Well, two records. Two records.
Okay.
And KRS would be a combo.
Got a double album. I love that.
Yeah, man. Back in the day,
Yes. Open it up, fan it out. Nice album.
Both sound like we got all this, all this content.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Sharif, to wrap it up, we do a little something. It's a challenge. We call it a challenge. We call it the 4x4 challenge.
4x4. And
all right, so we honor hip hop here on Real Talk, and we look at the 4 pillars of hip hop: graffiti art, DJing, breaking, and emceeing. And just ask you as a guest, could you give us a favorite artist from each of those 4 pillars? Now you already kind of covered.
Throw it up again. Yeah, throw it up again.
Sure, I will. There you go.
All right. Graffiti art, like you know what? Back in the day, I actually used to know folks who did that.
And I just learned. Sorry to cut you off, but I just learned that the word graffiti is actually derogatory. I forgot what it comes from, but it's because it kind of denotes a type of a negative connotation to the artwork. So I just
like street art. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm like,
sometimes we just call them writers. That's what sometimes in the culture, writers.
Yeah. Well, there's this one brother, and I'm kicking myself because I can't remember his name, but he was really instrumental in Philadelphia's murals. He ended up being hired. I think it used to be called, Make Philly Beautiful. It ended up being Mural Arts of Philadelphia. But he was one of the cats. I mean, he was, I, as a kid and even older, I was just like, how did they get on top of that water tower?
Right.
Down, like on the train, like it's like the artistry is amazing, and Philly is a great space for murals, but it draws, from, street art, and Baba Chang used to say, you know what? And they learned that from the hieroglyphics of Africa. Where they came from. You know what I mean? We've been doing this. You know what I mean? The other one, DJ. My favorite DJ is DJ Miz Sakini Moultrie. He was one of my classmates at Nathamu Sasa. He won, one of those national titles back when
Yeah,
we were
the
in high
world championship.
Yeah,
Hey,
you heard it. Yeah, DJ Miz,
Yeah.
we don't play. We
Yep.
don't play, So
Right.
shout out to DJ Miz. My favorite, what's the other one? MC?
We got MCs and breakers.
Mhm.
If you got a B-boy, B-girl breaker and an MC. Yeah.
Man, I don't know any breakers. Besides whoever was in Crush Groove killing it, that would be the breaker. Yeah, and my favorite MCs in addition to those would be he's not really an MC, but he's an MC. Amir Suleiman.
Okay.
Yeah, he's my favorite. He's so dope, so like just straightforward and beautiful messages. And then of course the ones who are doing the record, KRS and Chuck D. Like you already know what it is. You already know what it is.
There you go.
Yeah.
I should add a question, follow up to question. That is what would the title of your album be?
Fight the Power.
Oh, that's okay.
Perfect.
I
Right
figured.
off.
I figured that's what it would be.
It's the
So,
best
Sharif, you
song
talked about
ever. Yeah.
So I saw a Chuck D lecture at Temple. I remember
Mm.
that right there in the city of brotherly love. And
Nice.
I saw KRS, I think in February for like the third time. So please, yeah, when you ever get a chance, you definitely want to catch him live. I mean, you could do it like 4, 5, 10 years from now. You're still gonna get,
It's
like you
still
said,
get a treat. Yeah.
teacher, no doubt.
So all good things have to come to an end, but inshallah we'll have you on again because you threw that out in the universe and we have to make it happen. So we'll have you again. But again, if you are interested, Center for Black Educator Development, this is the website. Read Sharif's amazing blogs. You can also follow him on Twitter. And it's an honor and always a blessing to have you around, Sharif. I always learn so much from you, mashallah, and just your aura. And it just gives me the good feels. And I want to go and be a revolutionary all the time that I'm around you. So thank you for being on our show.
Thank you, Sharif. Really
Appreciate this, and
really
grateful, and keep up the great work. And alhamdulillah, I really feel blessed to be part of your community. Thanks for inviting me.
I appreciate
Thanks,
it.
man.
Appreciate it. Give our love to Oman, inshallah. May Allah give her shifa, as we said.
Shukran, alhamdulillah, ameen.
All right. Thank you. So have a good night.
You too.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. Take care.
So that was great. Again, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Real Talk, Our Space, or you can find us at altairconsulting.com. I'm always Elaine. Alaikum salam. Thank you for tuning in. Keith was loving it. I have to go back to what Bridget was also saying, where she's saying virtual teaching and copyright laws have severely limited our resources. How can teachers get around these rules during virtual learning? And I wish we had asked that earlier, but I'm sure maybe we can come up with some.
We might have to dig into that. Do some work
into that one.
ourselves,
That's a heavy one. So just stick with what we have for the show.
Yes. You talking about? I can tell you're in the zone still. I know.
I think September is going to be one of my favorite months for all. I love all of our guests.
Yeah.
But I think for next week, because I have not a personal connection, but I met this brother when we were at a conference in DC, and he said something that was so profound, right?
Yeah.
And so we're talking about Professor Jeffries, who will be on our show next week. He is associate professor of history at the Ohio State University, where he teaches courses on civil rights and Black Power movement. He also hosts the podcast Teaching Hard History, which is part of the SPLC and Teaching Tolerance. But the one thing that I keep in mind from what I loved about Professor Jeffries is the fact that when he was speaking to an audience full of middle school and high school teachers, he was talking about how when students come to him on the college level, they're not mad at him when he teaches them the hard history and the real history. They're mad at us.
Right, with the lies they learned. Yep.
The whitewashing and everything. So that's what stood out, and just an amazing person. So I'm really excited that we're going to have him on our show next week.
Looking forward to it. It's going to be fun.
Yes.
It's going to be fun.
It
Good month so far, and really appreciate. I guess the generations. I love that we started with the migration story, but the generations that Sharif really wove together for us. That means a lot to me. That's one thing. Honoring the elders.
Mm-hmm.
Standing on the shoulders of others, those that came before us, all that. And then what we do for, our children and those who we teach and those who are watching us. So, yes, it's a good evening. It's a good evening.
It's always, invigorating to have Sharif on, and we will have him on again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you for everyone for joining us this evening. And
Oh, before I forget, everybody give Doug a shout out. His birthday is on Saturday.
Oh,
Happy
you remember.
birthday. I almost forgot. So yes, happy birthday, Douglas.
Thank
How
you.
is
I appreciate
21
it.
again?
Yes. Another 21 years celebrated. We just keep
That's
layering those 21 years.
There
right?
you go. So happy
Yeah.
birthday, friend.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you, friend.
All right, everybody. Have a good night. See you next week.
Good night.
Bye.